Okay, good evening. We are starting. I'm not sure if you need the mic. I'm going to start with the microphone and then we're going to see if we need it or don't need it. So welcome to this event, which is called Densification as a Collective Process. As the title already reveals, it's about densification and the participative process of population when it's about densifying an existing area. This event is part of an exhibition which is called Dichtelust, which is currently in the Swiss Architecture Museum. My name is Andreas Kofler, I'm the curator of this exhibition. And I want first of all to thank the Bau- und Verkehrsdepartement, which is probably in English, I had to write it down, the Building and Traffic Department of the Canton Basel City, for hosting us here tonight and also for helping us and assisting us on realizing this exhibition. Then I thank Matias Echanove and Lukas Gruntz who are here tonight and are going to present us two projects. One is indeed a project and one is more process. I'm going to briefly present them. Matias Echanove, who sits here in the first row, he founded urbz in 2008 together with Raul Srivastava and Geta Mehta. urbz, that's an experimental action and research collective that now has offices in Mumbai, Bogota, Sao Paulo, Geneva and Seoul. And indeed, Matias is living between Mumbai and Geneva. The focus of his work is on new models of participatory governance and institution building. And there's a very nice quote on the website of urbz who maybe explains what this process means. They simply say, we believe that residents are experts of their neighborhoods, which I think is a very simple but very strong statement. Matias is not an architect, he's an urbanologist. So some of you may ask what it is. He's going to explain us maybe later, but I can explain you how you become an urbanologist. You first study economics and government at the London School of Economics. Then you study urban planning at Columbia University, New York. And finally, you study urban information systems at the University of Tokyo. And then you become an urbanologist. Then the second person we welcome today is Lukas Gruntz, who has an equally impressive biography. Young. Parts of them I'm going to explain them to you right now. So Lukas Gruntz studied architecture at the Fachhochschule Nord-West in Basel, Muttenz, and also at the École Nationale Supérieure d'Architecture Paris in Belleville. From 2008, he worked on various architecture firms. Amongst them, there's Esch Sintzel and Maranta here in Switzerland, but also Go Hasegawa in Tokyo. And Lukas is founder of the very prominent online magazine Architektur Basel here in Basel. And he's also president of the association Ein Haus WOBA, which is a project for the restoration of a house of the Swiss housing exhibition held in 1930 in Basel. And he's also a member of the Commission for Monument Subsidies of the Canton Basel City, and he's also a member of the Board of Housing Cooperative Gewona Nord-West. And so we're going to start with these two projects. We ask each one of them to briefly introduce them, and then we're going to have a discussion between Matias and Lukas, and hopefully also with the audience about these participatory processes and their relevance for Basel, or their potential relevance also for Basel. So I welcome Lukas first.
I try without.
Yeah, we can try it.
I try without the microphone. Thank you for this introduction. We decided that I start because my project is the academic approach to the subject of the re-densification of an existing plot in the city of Basel, and then we come to the reality check of this participative process. How can you do it in reality with different owners and the people who live there, the neighborhood? This study I did in the master's thesis here in Basel, together or supported by Dominique Salate, and it's somehow then I tried to do a summary, and this is this little booklet, and try to define some rules which I think are important when we talk about re-densification. And did it as a little manual, eine Anleitung. So just what I'm going to talk about is a bit the political and also the economic context here in Basel. Then short a few strategies about re-densification. Then the analysis of this plot I chose here in Basel. And afterwards we come to these manuals with a few instructions which I think are important in the subject, and a little conclusion to end. So the context here in Basel is the following. We have since like 10 years extremely high demand on apartments. So this is this curve here, which shows the Leerstandsquote, the empty apartments in Basel, which was the last years around 0.5%, which is super low, and that makes that the prices for renting an apartment are increasing. And this brings also economic interests, because it's more interesting to build apartments because you can earn more money out of it, and that makes that a lot of people in Basel are afraid of losing affordable apartment. And this brought us to this quite extreme result last year, the Wohnschutzinitiative, so an initiative, or it was a group of initiatives, but this was maybe the most extreme one, that really wants to protect renters in a stronger way as it is today. And I think no one really saw that this would be that clear result with more than 60% of people, yes. But it shows that there are a lot of people which are a little bit afraid of this situation, and as Basel is quite small, these dynamics are not easy to control. So there's one thing to change that is just to build more apartments. So to re-densify the city, or to densify, because Basel is more or less built. We have these areas, these industrial areas, which are coming, which are also shown at the Dichtelust exhibition, Liesbüchel, Gliebeck, Dreispitz. But when they will be, after, in like 15, 20 years, when they all will be transformed, and when there will be apartments and offices, then what rests is this quite heterogeneous structure in Basel of the Gründerzeit and also later on. So, and there at the moment what we do is like zoning up. So nowadays this would be, for example, a zone 4, so you can build 4 floors, and then what the political way is to say this becomes zone 5, so all the owners can build 1 more floor. But my position is that this, first it won't be like this, because there are different owners and maybe one will do it and the other not. And the other thing is that it does not really help the public space. So it does not bring quality. It's just densifying and more volume and more apartments, but no one cares about the quality of, especially the courtyard. We will talk about this later in my project. Maybe the street part, yes, and also the program. It's about the quality of space, but also of the program. And my thesis was to say we need, for this case, we need specific development plans, Bebauungspläne, where we can also have a higher density if we want, if it makes sense, and that we really can find specific solution, specific compaction. Then the other thing, what I found out, or where I think it's an important point to think about, is the question of affordable housing, affordable apartments. And nowadays, I think it's not really possible anymore to build affordable houses in Switzerland, or it's very, very hard. Starts with the prices for the land, which are also increasing extremely. So it's much easier just to keep let's say, develop in a more sensitive way the existing affordable apartments. That's much easier. So we really should care about this. And there are different strategies. We know this from La Canton Vassal, this coating. So just taking an existing strategy and with very simple construction, bringing them maybe also with new floors on top, bringing there more surface. Then this is more a special situation is this nidation, where you use an existing house or structure and then put inside a new program or a new space. This example is from Florence, from Firenze. It's an old Renaissance palazzo, and there in the base you have this little restaurant, this tiny restaurant in this impressive palazzo. Then, what we don't have a lot since today in Basel is the roof space extension. There's, I think, much more in Geneva. It's interesting. I think it's also the reason is in the existing construction law. So this would be a quite easy way, and today with wooden constructions we have a lot of technical know-how how you could do this quite fastly without having a huge impact on the existing structure beyond. So this is also what an initiative we did in 2016 is this Basel-Dach. Then the emplacement, so taking an existing structure, for example, an industrial structure, and bringing there like new boxes. This is from Tokyo, a shared house in an old garage actually, where they just put wooden boxes, and it became a share house for students or young people. So very simple strategy. So using a structure just as a shelf and putting in new use and spaces. And the other is also a very classic strategy, is just the extension, which is much earthier in the structural impact of a roof space extension is much bigger, and in Basel we have the problem of earthquake danger. So this can also be a simple and easy strategy. This is the Kraftwerk in Zurich, where they did an extension of a building of the 60s with very interesting cluster apartments, quite innovative. So we come to this area I chose for my study. I really had a lot of, or a variety of different plots in Basel, which I thought were interesting. I was at the city model and really just checked all the blocks and thought which could be interesting. And in the end, I chose this one. It's in the Iselin Quartier. So north of it is the Felix Platter Spital, and it's an area which most of the buildings were built after World War II, so 40s or 50s, in the 50s. So there's actually no historic buildings, and it's more or less built between the 40s and the 70s. This is a bit a selection of photos I took from this space, and what I thought is very interesting is that this is such a generic, conventional architecture which could be everywhere more or less in Switzerland. It's super unspecific, and but that makes it also somehow representative for different places. So it's very representative also for Swiss architecture. It's very solid. And as you see here, there is no street life. It's more or less dead, the public spaces. But there are qualities. And my first approach was really to find the qualities in this. And there are a lot of qualities. It's the architecture, which is very solid, and also actually the trees, the green spaces. There are qualities, but the program does not really fit to the space, and I think it's also not dense enough to have more public life or more activities in the ground floor, for example. But I found actually quite soon that there are a lot of potential and qualities. And then I also I checked all the plans from the city archive and brought them all together of all these houses. So it's this part here. This is built in the 50s. So half of it is built in the 50s. It's more or less the same typology. And then here we have one block from the 60s, was the development of this part. And here I also found that the construction is and I think there we are lucky in Switzerland. The construction is very solid and very sustainable. It's the 50s buildings. They are massive construction, which work today after 70 years still very well. So it's good quality. And also the plan, so that's the next. First also a short analysis about the public spaces, the trees, and the ownership. So I think this is also a big question. We're talking here about 14 different plots with, I think, 8 different owners. So this is a big issue when we come to, or if we would come to the reality of a realization, is how to deal this. So we have 8 different owners. How can we bring them to the point to develop it? And the other analysis I did was on the level of the existing apartments. So this is more or less the catalog of all the apartments existing in this block. And here I try to find the good points and the bad points of each apartment type of this whole block. And in general, I have to say that these apartments are quite sustainable, quite simple, but quite sustainable with good proportions, quite efficient. One big problem is that there are, with one or two exceptions, are no elevators. So for handicapped people, for elder people, this is a big problem, so no elevators. And the other part is just the balconies. There's not enough. But I think today, we like to have bigger balconies. The balconies are very small and very functional balconies. So these were the 2 points that I criticized. But in general, these apartments are, I think they work fine. They're quite generic, but they work. So there's really a quality in this. And then I started to do my project, and now I'm already coming to this instructions which I took out of my project in the end. So first part is the ground floor, is the density that we shouldn't only talk about the density of volumes of surface. It's much more important first to talk about the density of activities, of programs. So I really tried to bring there not too much, because it's still the Iselin quartier, so there won't never be in the next 10, 20 years a lot of street lights, but at least some at the corners, for example, to bring a little bar. And here I did a spa, and on top there's a badminton, because in Basel we have actually not really a public place where you can play badminton, at least in winter. So to add a few programs, and then also to try to find strong images or strong ideas of the public spaces in the courtyard, because nowadays or today here the courtyard is more or less private, or it's really separated in different. Actually, it's private in private parts. And I wanted to have some kind of transparency, and also to say, for example, that this part here in the north really becomes actually a public, more or less public square. Of course, there are some filters that makes it also maybe a bit more private, but to treat them as public spaces for all the people in the neighborhood, and not only for the ones which live there. So this is one image, and then the preserve is the second instruction. I would say is really try to preserve as much structures or apartments as possible. So because they as I said, they work, and it's also about the ecological point of materials that were brought there, and the whole question of gray energy. So I just added on a few points here and here. I added new elevations and staircases to have a connection to the new floors, and decided on strategic points here and here, because this building, the typology was really not so good. At 2 points, I decided to demolish the buildings and find new programs and also new volumes. But in general, most or 90% of the existing was preserved in my project. Here also in construction, this what I also said before, the wooden construction for an elevation, which works quite nice, and then create, and this is actually the roof plan of the roof floor. There I brought new apartments. So this is actually the part where the densification happens, and there I really cared also about the typologies. So the existing apartments are more or less generic and 3-4 room apartments. And here I thought about more specific apartment which does not exist today in this area. So it's mostly there are quite small apartments for one person household, for students. Here is like our students studios, and then also for elderly people. And all these new apartments have a connection with an elevator. So for handicapped people, they are accessible. And that's also the demographic development in Switzerland. I think it's a big issue we have to care about. And when we preserve the old or the existing apartments, which in that point are not strong, I think even more we should care about this in the new apartments we do. So create and also create strong spaces which have a strong identity. So really try to find a narrative of public space and the strong spatial, but also about the materials, this wooden balconies which are standing in the garden. So I said the part more south is the garden, and the other part is the courtyard. So as this typology of the hôtel entre cour et jardin. So this is really the garden with these tree houses. That's also part of this creation of strong spaces, which I think is really important when we talk about densifying existing structures. This is more the technical, just to show the potential of this plot. So there are more than the double number of apartments, but yeah, I have to say there are more or less small apartments, but still there's a lot more apartments. It's a quite high densification. What is also for me was really important, the build surface. So not to increase the part of the build surface, which also helps to preserve the trees, for example. I think existing trees is a great quality. It's also very important for the climate. So we always should try to, if possible, to preserve the existing trees, because to have a tree of that size, it takes 50 years. So this is here only 5% more built surface, with the 70% more surface of building. And also the public or the collective surface, which I try to increase. So let's come to let's finish with the conclusion. On the left side is the existing, and on the right side is my project, which I think shows quite well from this angle that there is much more density, but also an idea of a narrative of the city, even if it's in this academic approach maybe a bit artificial. So for me, what I defined redensification for me, or in my opinion, is higher usage density. So it's not just about higher density of surface, it's really of the usage is important. So how many people live there, how many collective or commercial spaces do we have? That's the important point about density. Then, if possible, always try to preserve the buildings. Third, creation of community programs, so that there are also programs for the community, whatever. It can be a library or a sports hall. And then the better layout of public spaces. That's in this study, it's the courtyard. The courtyard that I think what I know in Basel often is a public space with not a very high quality. So this is very important to find their ways, even if it's a number of 10 or 12 different owners, find ways to create public space with a good layout that allows a higher usage density. That's the end. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andreas, for this invitation. We're really glad to be here. I say we because it's a collective work I'm presenting. It's a work which was produced over a little bit over a year, and it's a project. I'm just specifically going to be talking about a project which was commissioned by the municipality of Versoix and the state of Geneva, and it's a participatory plan for a neighborhood, and it's a densification project. Before I go on to explain the details of the plan, I just want to tell you about, let's say, 3 particularities that we have urbz as a collective. First of all, we were born in India, so our office started in Mumbai, and about 10 years back. And it's only about 4 years ago that we opened an office in Geneva. And we did that at a moment in which there was a big change in regulation. The change was that every neighborhood plan had to go through a participatory process. So it's something that for a long time people were demanding. It's for a long time people knew it was a good practice, but it was not compulsory, and it was also there's also very little practice in this. So we saw an opportunity in that because we had been working in neighborhoods which have been historically developed by the inhabitants, and we always had been working very closely with people who build those neighborhoods locally. And that comes to, I come to other particularity in our collective is that we're not created by architects. Raul Shivastrav, who's the co-founder of urbz, is an anthropologist, and myself, I'm an urban planner with background in social science, more than architecture. So we work with architects, but we're not driven by architects. And the third particularity is that, and which is not so much of a particularity nowadays, is that we are a collective. So when Andreas mentioned all the cities where we're active in those cities through the members of the collective. So it's not directed from a central office. It's really more local initiatives, and we share portfolio, we share methodologies. So now the project. So first of all, the context is in Geneva, as in Basel, is one in which densification is both a need and also a huge struggle for the authorities and also for the inhabitants. These are all posters against densification, so there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of reaction against the densification, which people feel is really affecting the quality of life. In this poster, you see that I don't know if the data is accurate, but they say that Geneva is densifying so much more than even Basel and Zurich. So there is a strong sense of like let's say resistance against most of the urban plans which are happening now. At the same time, in Geneva in particular, I think it's the same in Basel City, we have no more space that can be used. We have a restriction now on all the agricultural plots which are left. We basically have to densify in order to create more housing. And there's a huge housing shortage. The specific context of Versoix, it's a municipality which is very close to the canton de Vaud, close to Vaud, and at the edge of Geneva, which was at some point a village and which has, since the 60s, become more of a dormitory town. Of course, people in Versoix don't like to be called a dormitory town. They feel strongly about the history of their neighborhood, and they also want to create another identity than this for Versoix. And it's also, the context is also one in which we are very close to the lake and very close to the forest and the fields. So in terms of the natural environment, it's quite a beautiful part of the city. The specific context of our site is this. It's a triangle. It's about 800 square meter. And as you will see, so first of all, it's a place where people are already living and working. So it's an active place. It's not an industrial plot that we can just reconvert. It's a place where we have to work with inhabitants. And part of it needs to remain. For example, the big building over here is not something that can be redeveloped at all. So you see it over there. And there's also a garage, which is also very active, and which is not going to be redeveloped. So mostly, so this will be a bit the usage. Also, there's a cemetery on one side over here, and there's the garage over there, and then it's surrounded by villas, such as this one over here, and inside it's mostly gardens. So and also the main difficulty we're facing is that on one side there's a huge there's railway tracks, so it's very constraining in terms of regulations, On the other side, of course, we have the symmetry, and we have a fabric which is mostly of small villas around, and people don't want to see big buildings coming in front of their villas. This is a plan that was proposed, not just proposed, but almost imposed in 2013, in which there would be a very strong densification, 2.3 FAR, and with buildings, towers going 10-story, with a big bar of building over here, a big rectangle, which connects to this one. This created a very strong reaction, and people have signed a petition, and it became a referendum, and 63% of the inhabitants of the municipality voted against the project. Although the state could have gone ahead with the plan, they decided to leave it and to abandon it. So this was 2013, 2014. And so we were asked to come for a participatory, to produce a participatory process and the plan. And of course, we had to come up with a totally different approach, one that would not be, that would not be top down, because the two things also that the other thing that people were really kind of angry about is not just the typology and the massive kind of densification that would happen in their neighborhood. It was also the fact that there seemed to be no participation, no involvement of the inhabitants in the process. So we decided to produce an approach which would be a qualitative approach to densification, meaning that we didn't start with an objective of densifying up to a certain number. We also decided to produce not an urban plan, but a neighborhood project, and that the urbanism would be driven by the process. And finally, rather than, and this is something that is common to all our projects, although we are in the dialogue, in the discussion, we try to avoid consensus building. It's not something that we seek at first. What we seek is cooperation. We seek strong ideas. We want people to be able to express themselves, which is something which is sometimes difficult to do in the Swiss context, not just in the Swiss context, but here, of course, it's very strong because we tend to want to agree, and there's a strong anxiety against towards conflict. So how to really stimulate people to speak strongly, to say what they really feel. This is what we try to do. We were very, very lucky to be provided with a house on site by the municipality of Versoix. And this house is a house that we really inhabited for about 6 months. So inhabited sometimes literally. We had residencies. Sometimes we were staying there. We also, the house of the project, meaning that it was open all the time, became the kind of open brain of the project, where people could come and see what was happening. This plan, because the initial plan in 2013 created such a strong reaction, this plan had to do not only with the owners, but also with the neighbors, also with the public at large. So the participation in that case was extremely open and large. So we had a room, for example, for references. We had lots of discussions in the house. And a constant kind of exhibition of the ideas, the ongoing ideas. We also, of course, went to meet the neighbors, to invite them. We pretty much every time we had an event we always provided food. It's always a good thing. And we also went to really discuss and try to understand the neighborhood from the point of view of the people who live there. This gentleman is a 94-year-old gentleman who lives on the site. He's also an inventor, and he's showing us one of his inventions here, which helps kind of putting a nail on the wall without having to use a hammer. He inspired us a lot, and he inspired the project in many ways, as I will explain later on. And so we basically activated the community through a series of events, workshop. We had a studio with EPIA, which is a school of architecture in Geneva. Also the Masters of Architecture in ETH participated in the first workshop. We had 4 public presentations. We had another workshop which was mostly with designers and architects. We had interactive exhibitions, so each of our exhibitions were always interactive. We always tried to use those moments as a time where we could have more feedback. In fact, we never stopped presenting the project as it was going on all the time, and repeating the narrative of the project, repeating what was unfolding, was a way in which we also built the narrative through feedback. And that was actually a very important part of creating a common project and a common understanding of what was going on. And of course, we had some more presentations. This is a very short movie which shows the first workshop that was held in the house itself, in which we invited all the residents, but also students from ETH, from EPIA, and other people that wanted to just register and come, even if they were not from the neighborhood. For us, we always try to not just work with, of course, the local residents, but also bring people from outside who represent a voice which is not that of the neighbor, which maybe is the voice of the future inhabitants, people who are interested in the process and the project, but not necessarily. Anyway, so yeah, it was the workshop was a very strong initial moment. About 80 people came into the house at that point. And we had, one of the events we organized was, because we were close to the cemetery, we organized a zombie night in which the urban planners of the municipality and the state presented the old plan and kind of buried the old plan. So, okay, you know, this is not what we're going to do. We're going to start something else. And very crucially, very importantly, we didn't start with the plan. We really started with nothing. And we slowly built a vision, which is a common vision, a vision which was presented many times, which was shared, which was shaped through interactions, which I think I'll describe it in more detail when we see the drawings of how the neighborhood, what the neighborhood, the project becomes. And we also had a set of principles. Those principles were important as guidelines. They were principles that we could refer to as the form of the new neighborhood was getting shaped up. We could always go back to those plans and say, to those principles and say, does the form represent the principles? The principles, which came again from the context and from the relationship with the interactions with the residents, were to create a neighborhood which would be human and natural at the same time. So there's no contradiction between a human habitat and a natural habitat. In fact, we wanted the neighborhood to contribute positively to the ecosystem, and that's something that really came strongly from people around who really appreciate the nature and the environment of Versoix. It was a place where we wanted people to live and work, so it's not a dormitory town. Again, it's a place where we go back to a notion of artisanship, which connects the habitat to livelihood in the way it was also in the past, and that was told a lot to us by people who lived there and who knew the neighborhood very well. It had to be open to all, but at the same time create space for intimacy, open and intimate. It could be dense, but it should not be without bigness. So no big buildings, no big towers. So create density, yes, because density is also a way in which you create a sense of urbanity and conviviality, but without overpowering the landscape. It's a place which had to be local, with a strong local identity, but at the same time very connected. We recognize the fact that one of the strengths of the neighborhood was that it was connected through railway, close to the airport, close to both the canton of Vaud and of the city of Geneva, and that it was a place which had to be co-created and also create the community in the process. So the co-creation is a notion that was both introduced during the process, but it's also one of the principles that we wanted to see in the future neighborhood. The process should not end with the plan. And then we presented a program that was about 6 months after the start of the project. a program without specifically showing where things should be located. So, okay, this is the program, this is the story we want to tell. Again, we had the opportunity of showing it in the house. So this was also something that we could stage and we could show and we could try to provide a feeling for how things could be. I'll explain the program in more detail when we see the plan because it becomes easier for you to understand also. A program also for the public spaces, but also for the buildings. Again, this program was constantly kind of challenged and we're in a constant interaction with the visitors of the house, and it was shaped by those discussions. And then, and that's something that is very particular to this project, is that the form really followed the process. The form followed the program, which seems like obvious, but it's not really the way things are done, at least in Geneva usually. Form follows process, some kind of concept that also created some strong reactions. Some people said it was very irresponsible to say this, that in fact the form should free itself from the process. We really thought that it was important in this case, if the project was to be accepted by the population, to ensure that the process is recognized in the form. So this was some early visualization of the project, in which we already start seeing, we see the program. The program was one of many small public spaces, open spaces, and relatively low-rise buildings, maximum ground plus 4, and also of a few places which were live work, with pretty much activity in every single building. This, fortunately, was a constraint from the beginning that we had to follow. Anyway, on this site, we could only do mixed use because of some regulations imposed to the site in reason of the noise coming from the plane and the trains. But it really had. And then slowly, we went into formalizing the project. And even in the formalization of the project, there was a lot of back and forth. We took the initiative of doing a financial plan as we were drawing the neighborhood in order to make sure that it was feasible. In fact, feasibility was always something that we paid a lot of attention to, because we were very worried and we really wanted to avoid creating a project that would be a list of wishes that could not be feasible. So we always checked, went back and forth, and we had to deal with extreme constraints, and all that was embedded. We also did, of course, all the sunlight studies and everything, and that became really something that we could explain all the time, because we found out that because we developed a relationship of trust, people were quite willing and to understand and to reason on why things could not be done a certain way, why things had to be done one way rather than another. So in the end, the project that this is the plan, and we basically went from a density of 0.7 to something which could be close to 1.8, which was far more than what we had to do at the minimum, and which also creates about 3,000 square meters of public spaces in a place which is quite dense. So part of it here on the plan, those areas, this is pretty much everything had to be retained, and this building is elevated, and those are the new buildings. So about five new buildings. The neighborhood project is, I'll just explain it directly on the screen over here. This is, I'll explain the program through this image. So first of all, we wanted a garden over here that would connect to the villas over here. We know that a lot of the owners of houses have gardens. There's a strong gardening culture in this neighborhood. So we wanted to kind of connect through this and have a kind of a quiet, nice entry to the neighborhood from the villa side. Here's a plan for a cooperative with, at the ground level, a large common space which goes all the way here. We use the slope, the 4-meter slope on the site to create a 500 square meter common space with a common kitchen at the center of the neighborhood. And create over here a place which is not enormous. We try to also keep those public spaces as always open and intimate rather than very large and impersonal. Here we have connected to the school over here a playground. Again, a strong demand from many of the residents for children. Here a place more for teenagers. In this front, the main constraint is that because of the railway and because of the risk of, I'm sure you're aware of this, this is something which is in the entire country, because of the risk associated with the transport of chlorine and explosion, all these buildings cannot have windows which can open. The windows cannot open. And this is something that, a constraint that we have to explain over and over again, that people understood. And so here we created a very kind of a more urban kind of front, with here a place which is mostly dedicated to teenagers, which is a skatable public space. So it's not a skate park, but it's a place with furniture that can be skated, and which can also be noisy because all these buildings cannot open the windows. So it's in fact protected from the nuisance of the train, and so we can create a bit more nuisance over here also. This building is a building for short-term stay, so for 6 months to 3 years. People who typically in Geneva, Basel is the same, we have many people who come in the city for short mandates. They come to work at the UN or in some the university or some corporation, and they need a place to land. So this is not housing, it's more accommodation. It's not very short term, but it's just mid-term. It allows you to be here in the city for a short amount of time and potentially either move on to another place in the city or move back if you're here just for a short time. And this building is a building for young graduates from professional schools who can. So it's also for maximum 6 years. And there's a big fab lab on the ground floor, inspired by the inventor kind of workshop that we talked to before. And this again is something that is connected to a foundation. We talked to a foundation in Geneva. There was one inhabitant of Versoix who told us that he was on the board, that it was something in high demand. We wanted to bring back young people into the neighborhood. It's a kind of an aging neighborhood. So we could this, and this is like an urban kind of terrace with a cafe connected to this building that we completely reopened on the ground floor, even though this building is a building which is pre-existing that we have to keep. And then we proposed a connection between that side of the neighborhood and the other side, which again it was a strong demand. This is not part of the plan as it is now, but we made sure that it could be done later on at some point if the budget was found by the municipality. So a few takeaways from the process. I won't explain them all, but basically in Geneva we have now a strong, and I think it's maybe the same in Basel now, we have a strong kind of debate between the right to the city, the right to house the people who need really to find a place to stay, an affordable place, and property rights. For us, to resolve this equation, to say that yes, the owners need to benefit, but at the same time we need to provide more housing, and we need to do it with the owners and with the neighbors in order to make it happen, it was something which was key to the project. To work with present residents, but also to bring into the debate and the discussion potential future residents. So it's not only driven by the neighbors, but also by people who may or would like to live in the neighborhood. Create places which are not only housing for people to stay forever, although we needed it in the neighborhood, but also create places which are more temporary, so accommodation versus housing. and of course turn the fear of density into a desire for urbanity. And we saw that this was something very strong through the process because people loved using the house, coming, meeting each other. So by already enacting this moment of density, of urbanity, it was made to be something desirable. Then of course, not create another suburb, create something which is an urban village. I know the term is sometimes contested. We feel that it's kind of let's say something which is an easy way of pleasing people, but actually the urban village is something that really kind of brings in very strong desire also. We want to create something which is, the urban village is typically dense and mixed use, and this is exactly what you try to do over here. And some memory that people have of all parts of the town or villages which have been urbanized, which provide a very good quality of life while being also dense. And then turn opposition into engagement, and this is something that definitely happened in this process. We have people who were the main kind of drivers of the opposition against the previous plan, who now are the main promoters of the new project, and this is something that we're really happy about, because this is that was the only way in which a project could be done. And so now, one thing that was very interesting in the process is that we were also a bit unsure about what was happening in terms of the future of this project and the architecture of the project. It's not an architect's plan. It's a plan which is really driven by uses and users. But we wanted also to know would be endorsed by architects. And we went to show the project to Andreas Ruby and later Andreas Koffler, and we asked them what they thought about it, and they said it should be part of an exhibition at the museum. So we thought it's a nice endorsement. It's a very important thing, because typically participatory projects like this are often accused of not producing good architecture. I thought maybe it's possible to be participatory and also do a good architecture. And what happened last week is that about 10 people, a representative of the municipality of Versoix, came to see the exhibition in Basel, and they had a great conversation with Andreas Ruby. And the idea now is that he would help us curate a workshop with young Swiss architects, which would be about public spaces and buildings, in which we would start designing those spaces. And we actually want to bring both a very strong individual architectural expression and a sense of creating something together, a neighborhood which needs to be also coherent internally, and of course connect to the rest of Versoix. So this is something that may happen this summer, hopefully. At least Versoix is very enthusiastic, and we feel that this type of relationship between first of all, between a city like Basel, which has a great architectural culture, and a city like Geneva, which really lacks architectural culture, unfortunately. And also between institutions which have an authority on what good architecture could be, and local municipalities which also are willing to engage with this is very important and excellent for the future of the project. So hopefully this happens this summer. The project goes on. Now we're at a stage in which we're trying to decide how to move on in the best possible way. The idea is that the municipality of Versoix takes on a big role in promoting the project, and that we bring the project up to a stage at which we can call the investors, but it's advanced enough that it's not driven by the investors. And this is, again, something which is very tricky and very important, which requires public funding, because as you may know, typically after the plan is done, usually that's the time in which you call in the promoters. They come in and they drive the architecture, and they basically reshape the plan to fit basically their own let's say balance sheet more than the program. So in order to respect a program like this, the proactivity, the proactive role needs to be played by the municipality, in which and this seems to be something that will be happening in this case. And I think I took much more than 20 minutes. Sorry for this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Other questions from the audience? Yes, there is one. Sorry.
Thank you a lot for the interesting case. First, a very short question. Who is the ground owner of these plots? And the second question that I'm interested in is, what were these co-creating processes looking like, or workshops? How did you actually create?
So there are 5 owners on the site. So there are 5 owners, and one of the owners is the municipality. The owners have been kind of really involved in the process as much as possible, while also understanding that the plan had to be done also beyond their own singular interest. But I think that because the plan actually manages to do something which is acceptable and feasible, we, for example, respected in the plan all the plot boundaries. To make sure that if one of the owner was not on board and decided not to go with the plan, that the plan could still anyway happen around it. So this is something which is typically not done. The plans, at least in Geneva, are usually kind of drawn over the entire site. In this case, again, trying to maximize the feasibility of the project, we decided to follow the plot boundaries. It seems that one of the owners has already, or is in the process of selling his land to a municipal foundation. The other one is this old man who's 94 years old, and his only request is he agrees that we create a plan, that we produce a plan, but he doesn't want anything to be built while he's alive. And that's something which is, very understandable. In fact, he was also a strong opponent to the last plan because of that reason, because they wanted to do it right now, and they really wanted him to move out. And the other owners who own the garage, they just want to keep the garage. They also have the garage, and they also, one of the son of the owner lives on the site. They want to do their own development, and we feel it's fine. I mean, their plots is already quite dense. We're just allowing them to densify whenever they want, and they don't want to bring in outside investors. They want to do it on their own. So we also kind of just definitely drew the plan around that. And the last owner is the big building, which is owned by the Rothschild Foundation. They're very happy about a plan happening because they struggle with the arcades, the small shops on the ground floor. That's why we deliberately didn't put new stores, new shops in the rest of the plan to try to make sure that their arcades, their shops, could start providing for the neighborhood. So they're quite happy to kind of to enter the project. So in this case, it was five owners, and it seems that they're quite okay. In terms of co-creation, for us, what's really important is that the co-creation has to be about the narrative. First of all, the narrative, the story, the scenario of use. How do we want to use the neighborhood? It's not about whether this building should have that shape or the color of things. It's really about the story that we're telling each other and the story that we agree on kind of on defending. So it becomes much easier when it's not about design and architecture. So the participation is at the level of the program, and then when the forms starts coming, we make sure that we have full transparency on what comes in, and we integrate feedback as they come.
Follow questions?
Yeah, it was very interesting, thank you. So you talked about consensus building in Switzerland, especially no conflict. Can you elaborate on that, and what do you do to basically that this doesn't happen?
So typically, participation. How is participation done? Typically, in a, let's say like in other projects, you have two ways of doing participation. One is a participation or consultation. The classic one is PowerPoint presentation. Here's the project. Do you have questions? Yes, no. And then maybe this is recorded, and that's pretty much it. And there's very little participation in producing the plan, or no participation in producing the plan. The plan is already done when you start talking to the public. So that's where you basically, and people are quite shy, either to express themselves, they think they don't know, or they're just really against, like everything, because maybe one particular thing in the project, affects them in particular. Then the other way is the roundtable discussion. And the roundtable discussion is typically a moment in which there's a few strong voices that dominate the discussion, and the others, and this is something we've seen again and again, tend to not want to express. And I've been myself in roundtable discussions as a participant, in which I felt, do I really want to start an argument with that person? Does it really matter that much? Maybe I just keep quiet because it's easier. And then you quiet yourself. But you may have something very interesting to say. So how do we avoid this? First of all, we try to engage the people individually. So we have an individual attention to pretty much everybody who comes, and it's not thousands of people. The people who typically come, you can manage if you're there. If you take time, it's about 70, 80, 100 people. You can have this type of individual or a small group attention and explaining and discussion. So you have to be there as a moderator, and also you engage people in a creative process rather than just a deliberation on kind of let's say overall ideas and objectives. So we just try to stimulate the creativity of people, and we try to make sure that they basically just encourage them to say what they feel, sometimes just emotions, encourage them to say what they know. So knowledge is also very important and is builds the project. Encourage them to give ideas, and the ideas sometimes are very singular, and those singular ideas are very important because suddenly they can be very strong, and they can be integrated in the project and really help it. And also to ask questions. So through this process, and yeah, so when our workshop is about producing something rather than discussing something. So in this act of production, there's more scope for lots of different expressions.
I wonder a bit about the departure point of your two projects. I mean, in your case, there has nearly been a slightly traumatic moment. So like suddenly the inhabitants realize they want to make a tower there. And then obviously when you arrive and you say, well, we're here to talk with you, to discuss with you, to plan with you, they're really open to discussion. There are a few tricks you mentioned, like for example food or a zombie party. But probably there are other strategies to make them talk. But then maybe in the departure point Lukas now has is like that there are like 8 different property owners in this block, and the people living there probably live very harmonious and idyllic lives and are happy about how they are living, and probably would feel threatened by a participative process. So I wonder how you would imagine starting your project, what kind of legal framework or what kind of conditions the city of Basel, for example, could provide to facilitate or encourage such processes of small-scale densification, what this is all about.
Yeah, I think this the critic point at the moment, that what I did at the moment probably would never happen. I tried to talk to all the owners there and to ask them several questions, and one reaction was, I'm happy that I don't have more to do with the other neighbors, so please let me. And this, I think, anyhow to have this process when we talk about densification. There should be tools of the city which always have to be, on one hand, also economic. So the owners have to, or they need a benefit, because yeah, that's our system. And then on the other hand, we need just people that manage this process. Mm-hmm. So bring them together, and then what you did somehow, but more with the owners, and then also with the people living there. So. That's up to develop, I think, here in Basel. When we're talking about all these quarters of the Gründerzeit with heterogeneous ownerships, mm-hmm. If we want to densify them in a qualitative way, so, mm-hmm. But it does not exist, I think, at the moment. And mm-hmm. It's private, so the state has nothing to, or not that much to say.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You have not mentioned anything about the financing of the whole project. I mean, the present owners would have to engage, of course, in the financing. In the end, it should be an added value for everybody there, and I think that is one of the major questions you could solve in tempting then the owners to really engage in such a project. And is that what our experience is about that? We need to finance in the end. Who would finance it? Is it the owners, or would you have other parties to engage in?
That's a question that, of course, we took very seriously, and the owners themselves, some of them had been trying to develop for years, and they already. One of the owners said that he spent hundreds of thousands of Swiss francs trying to do projects and develop his plot, and it didn't succeed. So he was basically, desperate. He said, okay, I mean, I lost all that money, I cannot do anything with the plot. So to unlock the possibility of creating something on the plot was a big thing for him. And we made sure also that, that part of the feasibility of the project was to reach a certain density level. So this is the project has to always be kind of very grounded in the financial plan. That's why it was not part of our mandate, but we financed ourselves a financial plan to make sure that it would make sense, because we knew that in the dialogue with the owner, we had to speak about numbers. So I mean, I totally agree with you, and it's a very important part of the process. At the same time, I feel that something that also in your case, in this case of this project, to bring the people from outside is also very important. People who are not only the owners or only the inhabitants, because then it forces also the inhabitant and the owners to think that, okay, I mean, this right to the city, this right to also have a place to stay, is something that they have to say something about. If the only argument they're going to have is no, I just want to keep my house, they can do it, and they have a right to do so, and everybody agrees. But ultimately, they decide willingly not to address a social issue, which is a very important one. So I think this kind of relationship, where the owners and the inhabitants have to understand that they're also part of a city which has some needs, is extremely important. So the financial aspect, of course, and the owners have to be respected for this, and they need to have their interest, otherwise nothing is going to work, represented. At the same time, they need also to understand that the form that the development is going to take is going to have to respect some will which is much larger than their own interest. So there is a trade-off, that they also need to understand. I mean, typically, an owner would always be happier with more densification if he only wants to kind of make a return on his land. But he has to understand that that more densification may not be feasible at all. That the only densification that he can do is one which is socially accepted. So that relationship needs to be very clear, on both sides.
I have a question to this project from Versoix. I mean, how strongly do the inhabitants and neighbors accepted the guidelines concerning rentability, concerning densification? I mean, when you have the participation processes clearly, but with, I think, some really strong guidelines in a certain sense.
I mean, the first thing we did is to talk to people who were part of the referendum, the opposition, the people who drove the referendum. We first approached them. And the first question we asked them is, are you against development per se? Are you just against development? Or are you willing to accept development if it's something that you can recognize yourself in? That, you know, is there any form of development that you would be happy with? And nobody said at any point in the entire process that they were just against development per se. You know, they were like okay with the idea that something was going to happen there, but it needed to be something that that they like, you know, that they want, something which adds value to their neighborhood. And there was plenty of ways in which a project could add value to their quality of life. So I mean, finding those is key. I mean, that's what the process is all about. You know, basically it's about what are the parameters that would make people accept a project. You know, what would they make them want to have a project, and so the project needs to be good for them, and that's the bottom line. You know, and so I think that's what happened. In this case, yeah, we didn't see that, and we were surprised ourselves. You know, we thought that we'll find people who would be just like, no, you know, we want to keep the neighborhood as it is. We don't want to change anything. And in fact, we saw that there's a strong desire for a sense of gathering, conviviality, you know, places where they can interact, because people are quite isolated, and the neighborhood is aging. And the neighborhood is slowly, you know, turning into more of a dormitory town. So to bring something that could counter those dynamics in a very positive way was something that people were quite willing to see, you know.
And so they don't question it in any way, the guidelines?
So the guidelines that we produced, let's say the principles, the 6 principles, we had a meeting like this, you know, after 3 months, we had the public meeting. In a room very much like this one, in which about 60 people from the neighborhood came, and we presented them, and we said, and for most of them it was nothing that just, it was not a surprise, because they had been part of the discussions, you know, for like 3 months, they had come. Anybody who was interested had seen what was going on. So we asked them, do those guidelines represent, like, or those principles, is this something that you recognize yourself in? Do you agree with them? And people were, like, the main thing people said is, yes, but the plan better reflect those principles, because if it doesn't, then we'll feel cheated, you know. So basically, that's what we tried to do the whole time. And at any point, we're open to, you know, to have someone who says, no, like, I disagree. And if you disagree, you know, then it's about engaging in a rational discussion with someone to understand why the person disagrees. And probably the person has a good reason, something to say, that needs to be integrated, needs to be recognized. And in fact, recognition of people's claim is everything in a project like this. And people feel that they're not being heard, you know, and that is why they oppose projects most of the time. They feel like, you know, they have no consideration for what they may have to say.
Further question to Lukas first, concerning the owners. I mean, you said 7 or 8 different owners. This was the only reaction from this one person who said, oh no, I want to have nothing to do with my neighbors? Or were there also different reactions from persons who said in the neighborhood, or perhaps also the owners who said, well, this could be interesting for the future in many ways?
There's a mixture of owners. There is like 1/3 are private person. And there I had more this reaction that they're actually not really interested to develop their house. Times they also live there in their own house, so they are actually more or less glad, and they have their economic profit. And then on the other hand, 2/3 are Pensionskasse and then Zurich Insurance, and they were quite interested. Because they saw, of course, a potential to have also higher density than what the zone would allow today. So they were interested, but in this case, it would really need actually all the owners to have, for example, this idea of a public and transparent courtyard. So that's I think the really problematic point in a city as Basel. It really needs all of them, and if you just do one, of course you could do it, and maybe it would be better anyway, but actually we need to find a tool to bring them all together and to make them have a benefit out of it. And then on the second part, it would be also the inhabitants and the neighbors, of course. But first, if the owners they're not interested, it gets quite difficult to start any process.
Can I just on this? Can a city buy them out? Is that possible? Like
but the pension funds you need to talk to the pension funds. They would buy them out, and then you can do a big project.
Yeah, the pension, the public could, but the owners still have to accept it. So Enteignung is difficult. Yeah, that would be interesting to say the city.
Buy them out. If you pay the interesting price they want,
right.
Buy them out,
right.
and not take it away from them.
Yeah.
There's a practical question to your project. You're adding another floor, actually.
A bit louder, please.
You're adding another floor, and that floor, is that accessible then by escalators only, and the other below are not connected to any escalators? Is that because you think it's then for elderly people or disabled people who would move in or buy this?
Yes, exactly. That was a question I asked myself too, but it's just the case if you do in existing how the floor plans didn't really allow to integrate an elevator, or this had been such a large and strong operation that actually this idea of preserving the existing failed at that point. So I really decided to just do the new apartments with
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question to your last presentation with the city of Versa. I mean, I think it's quite interesting how you approach this kind of like participative process to develop something. But on the other side, I think, isn't there like a tendency that you might get lost at some point in what all the people want and all their needs? I mean, you said they were sad because they weren't heard. They never participate. So finally they can participate, and I mean, it's a rather small site. And now they want everything. It seems a little bit like you put a lot of different kind of, there's a garden and there's the space and then there's everything inside. And isn't there like a tendency that you might get lost, that there might be another place somewhere inside the community that might fit this special, some needs better? So you just focus on this one side and not on the bigger neighborhood and the community itself.
It's true. It's true that that this site. I mean, this site is actually it's a densification project. So there's a density of program also for sure. But there's nothing in the program that we been proposing that is in conflict with something which is already proposed somewhere else in the neighborhood. So in fact, it's true that when people see an opportunity to have something that addresses their need, and it's there, it's happening now, they come and they have requests, they have things that they know that they want. So, but of course, but at the same time, it is a dialogue with the context always. So there's a new kind of center which has been built on the other side of the railway. We're trying to connect to it and to be complementary rather than to be in competition with it. I mean, all of that is very true. So of course, and yeah, I mean, it's true that there's also a lot of things that come out. And some things are not feasible, but you have a discussion about it. You say why it's not feasible, why, and if it is feasible, why not integrating it? If it's a real need and if it's feasible, then why should it not be in the plan? But if it's not, on the other hand, I mean, the thing is, if people trust that you really engage in trying to make the best plan possible, and people, I mean, at least in this case, we found that people were really reasonable and rational in the discussion. So there was no hysteria about no, this needs to happen and this not. As long as people feel respected in the dialogue and they understand, the constraints. This site was full of constraints, I mean, extremely hard constraints, and we had to explain the constraints so many different times, and people understood them. You have to take the time to explain, but it's so important, and yeah, I feel. I mean, maybe that's also something which is you know, I don't know if it's true that the plan is charged with many things on a very dense program, but you know, we felt that this was something that was bringing quality to the plan, and it was not. And it's not just a collection of different things which are not connected. Everything is connected programmatically as well. So, so yeah, it's not kind of a mosaic of different things, a patchwork of different kind of desires. It's all things that make sense together and kind of bring like a small, dense, little kind of heart in that largely residential neighborhood. So yeah, I mean, I don't see how it would be better if it was. We tried to avoid the emptiness, you know, in this specific case. It would have been very easy to say, okay, we build something on the edges, and then inside is a big open park, you know, because that's what happens everywhere. But big open spaces like this, there's just one next door, you know. There's a big school with a large open ground, and there's plenty of connections with nature also in the neighborhood. So it was not really what was necessary in this case, and it was not really what was maybe bringing quality. So that was something that, yeah, you know, we decided to go that direction in that case. You know, if there was a need for something else, we would have, you know, done a larger open space. But in that case, we willingly decided to kind of like have those small and intimate, open and intimate spaces, which is one of the principles, you know, that we also tried to kind of give form to.
Okay. Yes, maybe we continue later with some informal questions. We hope to support you, well, now even on an operational scale. And in general, the exhibition we are currently featuring, Lichterlust, is actually an exercise in making people aware of the possibilities they have through density. So, yeah, somehow we literally try to make them a bit drunk of the possibilities they have through a denser project, and make them aware that in theory they can reclaim something for their community and that they have a surplusing program they can use. So I finish maybe on this by reminding all of you that the current exhibition is still on show until May 5, and that we continue actually also this discussion in some way or the other April 11, again here in the spaces of the Bau- und Verkehrsdepartement. There's a panel discussion with the Federation of Swiss Architects, specifically on the subject of cooperative housing developments in Basel. So this will somehow echo some of the subjects we had tonight. Then on April 4, some of you may not have noticed or not have seen it yet, the room next door features a huge city model of Basel, a 40 square meters large model of Basel in a scale of 1 to 1,000. And around it we have several lunchtime events with the Bau- und Verkehrsdepartement, where each project leader explains the challenges of the new densification projects in Basel. The next one is already the last one. It's on April 4, and the project leader are going to show the projects in Basel Northeast, which is Kleebeck, the Port, and the Dreiland project. And before the Lichterlust exhibition closes, there's also a public tour, which is on May 2, a few days before the exhibition closes, and it's going to be at the SEM, of course. So then I thank, obviously, our guests tonight, Matias Echanove and Lukas Gruntz. I take the advantage, again, to thank our host, the Building and Traffic Department of the Canton Basel City. I'll thank ourselves, Valerie Zuber, Jörg Sovins, Andreas Rubi, Michel Thüring, to help organizing this evening. And I thank all of you for coming tonight. Thanks a lot.